My family skipped my medical school graduation to attend my brother's backyard barbecue party. They said his celebration was more important. 3 days later, I received a phone call that changed everything. The voice on the other end said, "Dr. Hernandez, this is the White House calling." What happened next left my entire family speechless and scrambling to explain their choices. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Addison Hernandez, and this story begins in Denver, Colorado, where I spent 8 grueling years pursuing my dream of becoming a doctor. While my younger brother Marcus was coasting through his business degree at a local community college, I was pulling all-nighters in medical libraries, surviving on instant coffee and determination. The Hernandez family had always been tight-knit, or so I thought. My parents, Roberto and Carmen, owned a small automotive repair shop that had been in our family for 3 generations. They were hard-working people who understood the value of dedication, which made what happened next even more devastating. Medical school graduation was scheduled for Saturday, May 18th, at the University of Colorado's medical campus. I had been looking forward to this moment for years. After countless failed exams, retakes, clinical rotations that pushed me to my physical and mental limits, and student loans that would follow me for decades, I was finally going to walk across that stage as Dr. Addison Hernandez. 2 weeks before graduation, I sent the formal invitation to my parents, my brother Marcus, my sister Isabella, and my grandparents. The ceremony was set for 2 p.m. at the university's main auditorium. I even included parking instructions and suggested they arrive early, since seating would be competitive among the families of 200 graduating medical students. My mother Carmen called me 3 days after receiving the invitation. Her voice carried an unusual tension that I couldn't quite identify at the time. "Mia, about your graduation," she began, using the affectionate term she'd called me since childhood. "We might have a little problem with the timing. I was studying pharmacology in my cramped studio apartment, surrounded by textbooks and empty takeout containers." "What kind of problem, Mom?" "Well, Marcus planned this big celebration for finishing his associate degree. He's been working really hard, and he wanted to have a party at the house. He invited all his friends, some cousins from Pueblo, and even got a catering truck to come." I set down my highlighter, feeling a knot form in my stomach. "Mom, my graduation is on Saturday. You've known about this for months." "I know, sweetheart, but Marcus just told us about his party yesterday. He's so excited, and you know how sensitive he gets. He said it would really hurt his feelings if we weren't there to support him." The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus, who had changed his major 3 times, took 6 years to complete a 2-year program and still lived in our childhood bedroom at age 24, was being prioritized over my medical school graduation. Can't he reschedule his party? This is medical school, Mom. This is 8 years of my life. Carmen's voice became defensive. Don't be selfish, Addison. You're always so focused on yourself. This is important to Marcus, too. Besides, graduations are all the same. You walk across a stage, they hand you a piece of paper, people clap. Marcus's party is going to be special. He's been planning games and activities. I felt my chest tighten. It's not just a piece of paper, Mom. It's my doctorate. It's the culmination of everything I've worked for. You don't need us there to validate your success, she replied curtly. You're independent now. Marcus still needs our support. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but the outcome was predetermined. My parents had made their choice, and nothing I could say would change their minds. When I hung up, I sat in my apartment staring at the graduation invitation that would go unanswered by my own family. I called Isabella next, hoping my older sister would understand the significance of the moment. Isabella worked as a dental hygienist in Colorado Springs and had always been the voice of reason in our family. Bella, please tell me you're still coming to my graduation, I said when she answered. There was a long pause. Addie, I'm really sorry, but Mom called me already. She explained the situation with Marcus's party. Look, I don't want to cause drama in the family. You know how Mom gets when we don't present a united front. So you're choosing a backyard barbecue over my medical school graduation? It's not about choosing. It's about keeping peace. Besides, Marcus has been really depressed lately about his grades and job prospects. This party means a lot to him. One by one, each family member delivered the same message. My grandparents, who had helped pay for my undergraduate textbooks and always bragged about their granddaughter in medical school, suddenly had conflicting commitments. My aunts and uncles, who had watched me study throughout family gatherings for years, were all planning to attend Marcus's celebration instead. The most painful conversation was with Marcus himself. When I called him directly, hoping he might understand the conflict he had created, his response revealed everything about our family dynamics. "Come on, Addie, don't be dramatic," he said, clearly annoyed that I was bringing up the scheduling conflict. "You've always been the smart one. You don't need a big celebration to prove anything. My party is going to be awesome. I rented a bouncy house and everything." "Marcus, this is medical school graduation. Do you understand what that means?" "Yeah, it means you're going to make a ton of money and probably never visit home anyway. This party is my chance to celebrate with people who actually care about me." His words stung more than I expected. "People who actually care about you? I'm your sister. You're my sister who's been too busy studying to hang out with the family for the past 4 years. When's the last time you came to one of my softball games or just watched a movie with us on a Sunday? This is important to me, Addie. For once, can't something be about me instead of your perfect academic career?" The accusation hit me like a physical blow. It was true that I had missed family gatherings, declined invitations to casual events, and prioritized my studies over social time. Medical school demands that level of sacrifice. But I had assumed my family understood that the isolation was temporary, that the goal was worth the cost. After Marcus hung up, I realized that my family viewed my dedication not as admirable persistence, but as selfish abandonment. They had reframed my absence during critical study periods as evidence that I no longer valued family relationships. In their minds, attending Marcus's party while skipping my graduation was justified payback for years of perceived neglect. Graduation day arrived with unseasonably cold weather for mid-May in Denver. I woke up in my studio apartment, put on my cap and gown alone, and drove to campus knowing that I would be the only graduate in my class without family in attendance. The ceremony was held in the university's largest auditorium, packed with proud families holding flowers, cameras, and congratulatory signs. As I sat in the designated graduate section, I watched my classmates wave to their loved ones in the audience. Parents dabbed their eyes with tissues. Siblings held up phones to record the moment. Grandparents beamed with pride. When my name was called, I walked across the stage to polite applause from strangers. The dean shook my hand and handed me the diploma that represented 8 years of sacrifice, $300,000 in student loans, and countless nights questioning whether I was strong enough to continue. I smiled for the photographer, knowing that this moment would exist only in the official university records. After the ceremony, graduates gathered outside with their families for pictures and celebrations. I stood alone near the parking lot, still wearing my cap and gown, scrolling through social media posts from my classmates who were already sharing photos with their proud families. That's when I saw Marcus's party in full swing on Isabella's Instagram story. The backyard was decorated with balloons and streamers. A taco truck was parked in the driveway. My parents were laughing and taking pictures with Marcus, who was wearing a shirt that read, "Associate Degree Champion." My grandparents were sitting at a picnic table sharing a plate of nachos. Everyone looked genuinely happy to be celebrating Marcus's achievement. I drove home from graduation in complete silence, still wearing my cap and gown. My diploma sat on the passenger seat, and I kept glancing at it, trying to feel the pride. and accomplishment that should have accompanied this moment. Instead, I felt hollow. My apartment felt smaller than usual when I returned. I hung my graduation gown in the closet next to my white coat from clinical rotations, two symbols of a journey that apparently only mattered to me. The silence was deafening. No congratulatory phone calls, no flower deliveries, no celebration, dinner plans. I ordered Chinese takeout and ate lo mein straight from the container while watching Netflix, still in my graduation dress. Around 8 p.m., my phone finally buzzed with a text message from my mother. "Hope your ceremony went well, Mija. Marcus's party was beautiful. Wish you could have been here." The casual tone of her message felt like salt in an open wound. She wrote, "About my graduation, as if it were a minor inconvenience that had prevented me from attending the real celebration." There was no acknowledgement of what she had missed, no recognition of the milestone I had achieved alone. Over the next few days, I threw myself into preparing for my residency at Denver General Hospital, which would begin in just 6 weeks. I had matched into internal medicine, a competitive specialty that would require another 3 years of intensive training. The program director, Dr. Margaret Sullivan, had already sent detailed information about orientation, schedules, and expectations. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. My family's absence from graduation had created an unexpected side effect. It clarified my priorities with startling precision. For years, I had assumed that my medical career was something I was pursuing for both personal fulfillment and family pride. Now I understood that this journey was entirely mine. I spent the following weekend apartment hunting closer to Denver General. My current studio was a 45-minute commute from the hospital, and residency would demand 12-hour shifts that made proximity essential. I found a modest one-bedroom apartment just 8 blocks from the medical center and signed a lease that would begin July 1st. During this transition period, my family continued posting photos from various gatherings and celebrations on social media, always without any mention of my recent graduation. Marcus's party had apparently been such a success that it spawned several follow-up events. There was a family barbecue the following Sunday, a cousin's birthday party the weekend after that, and a graduation party for Marcus's girlfriend who had finished her cosmetology program. The pattern became clear. My family had an active social calendar that simply didn't include me. What I had interpreted as busy schedules conflicting with my graduation was actually a conscious choice to prioritize other relationships and events. 3 weeks after graduation, I received an unexpected phone call from Dr. Rachel Martinez, a researcher at the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta. Dr. Martinez had been following my published research on antimicrobial resistance patterns in rural hospitals, work I had completed during my final year of medical school. "Dr. Hernandez," she said, "I've been impressed with your research methodology and findings. We have a project here at the CDC that would benefit from your particular expertise. Would you be interested in discussing a potential collaboration?" The conversation lasted an hour. Dr. Martinez explained that the CDC was launching a comprehensive study of antibiotic resistance patterns across underserved communities in the American Southwest. They needed someone with both clinical training and research experience who understood the unique challenges facing rural healthcare systems. "We've reviewed applications from dozens of recent graduates," Dr. Martinez continued, "but your work stands out. You've identified patterns that our senior researchers missed. We'd like you to consider joining the project as a co-principal investigator." I was stunned. Co-principal investigator was a position typically reserved for physicians with years of experience, not someone who had graduated from medical school 3 weeks earlier. The opportunity would mean deferring my residency for a year, but it would also mean working on research that could impact healthcare policy at a national level. "Dr. Martinez, this is an incredible opportunity, but I should mention that I'm scheduled to begin residency at Denver General in 6 weeks. We've actually already spoken with Dr. Sullivan about that possibility. She's agreed to defer your residency start date if you're interested in the CDC position. This type of research experience would actually strengthen your residency application and open doors for academic medicine later in your career. After the call ended, I sat in my apartment trying to process what had just happened. The CDC, one of the most prestigious public health institutions in the country, was offering me a research position based on work I had done independently during medical school. The same work that my family had dismissed as just studying was now being recognized by national experts in the field. I called Dr. Sullivan at Denver General to discuss the possibility of deferring residency. She was not only supportive, but enthusiastic about the opportunity. Addison, this is the kind of experience that will set you apart for the rest of your career, Dr. Sullivan explained. The CDC collaboration will give you research credentials that most physicians never achieve. When you do start residency next year, you'll bring a level of expertise that will benefit both you and our program. That evening, I made the decision to accept the CDC position. I would spend the next year in Atlanta, working on research that could influence national healthcare policy. It felt like the universe was rewarding me for the isolation and sacrifice that my family had criticized. I called Dr. Martinez the next morning to accept the position. She was delighted and explained that I would be working directly with the CDC's antimicrobial resistance team, contributing to reports that would be presented to Congress and the World Health Organization. Dr. Hernandez, there's one more thing, Dr. Martinez added toward the end of our conversation. This research has caught the attention of some very high-level officials. The White House Office of Science and Technology Policy has been following our antimicrobial resistance initiatives. They're particularly interested in work being done by young researchers who understand rural healthcare challenges. I didn't think much of that comment at the time. The White House seemed like an abstract entity that existed in a completely different universe from my daily reality as a new medical graduate living in a studio apartment in Denver. 2 weeks before my scheduled move to Atlanta, I decided to visit my family and share news about the CDC position. I hadn't spoken to anyone in the Hernandez household since receiving my mother's dismissive text message about graduation, but I thought this achievement might bridge the gap that had formed between us. I drove to the family home in Aurora, a modest ranch-style house where I had grown up. Marcus's car was in the driveway alongside my parents' vehicles, suggesting a family gathering was already in progress. When I knocked on the front door, Isabella answered with a surprised expression. "Addie, what are you doing here? We weren't expecting you." The house was filled with the familiar sounds of family conversation, television noise, and my mother's cooking. I could smell her signature green chili stew simmering in the kitchen. For a moment, I felt a wave of nostalgia for the comfort and warmth of family gatherings. "I have some news to share," I told Isabella as she led me into the living room where my parents and Marcus were watching a baseball game. "Well, look who decided to visit," Marcus said without looking away from the television. "The doctor finally has time for her family." My mother emerged from the kitchen wearing an apron covered in flour. "Mija, what brings you by? We're just having a quiet Sunday together." I took a deep breath and announced my news. "I've been offered a position with the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta. They want me to lead a national research project on antibiotic resistance. I'm deferring my residency to take the opportunity." The room fell silent for a moment. My father, Roberto, looked up from his newspaper for the first time since I'd arrived. "The CDC?" he asked. "Like, the government health people?" "Yes, it's a really big opportunity. They reviewed research I published during medical school and offered me a co-principal investigator position. It's the kind of work that could influence national healthcare policy." My mother wiped her hands on her apron and gave me a measured look. "That sounds very important, sweetheart. When do you start?" "I will move to Atlanta in 2 weeks. I'll be there for a year, then return to Denver for residency." Marcus finally turned his attention away from the television. So you're moving even further away from the family. Typical Addison, always chasing the next achievement. His words stung, but I tried to maintain my composure. This is about contributing to important medical research, Marcus. The work could help save lives. Everything you do is about saving lives or being important, he replied. When are you going to care about just being part of this family? The conversation continued in this vein for another 30 minutes. Despite the prestigious nature of the CDC opportunity, my family's reaction was lukewarm at best. They seemed more concerned about my physical distance from home than excited about my professional achievements. I left the house that afternoon, feeling more disconnected from my family than ever before. Their response to the CDC news confirmed what I had begun to suspect after graduation. We had fundamentally different values and priorities. As I drove back to Denver, I realized that my family's absence from graduation had actually been a gift. It had forced me to define success and achievement on my own terms, without the need for external validation from people who didn't understand or appreciate my chosen path. Moving to Atlanta in July felt like stepping into an entirely different world. The CDC headquarters in Chamblee was a sprawling complex of modern buildings surrounded by carefully maintained grounds. On my first day, I walked through the security checkpoint wearing my new employee badge, still somewhat amazed that I was now part of an organization that influenced global health policy. Dr. Martinez introduced me to the Antimicrobial Resistance research team, a group of 12 scientists, epidemiologists, and public health experts who had been working together for several years. I was by far the youngest member of the team, and initially, I worried about fitting in with such experienced professionals. My concerns proved unfounded. Within the first week, it became clear that my perspective as a recent medical graduate actually provided valuable insights that the team had been missing. While the senior researchers understood the broad patterns of antibiotic resistance, I could identify specific clinical scenarios where their theoretical models didn't match real-world hospital experiences. The project focused on mapping antibiotic resistance patterns across rural hospitals in Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah. These facilities served predominantly Hispanic and Native American populations, communities that often faced barriers to accessing specialized medical care. My research during medical school had examined similar healthcare disparities, making me uniquely qualified to understand both the clinical and social factors influencing treatment outcomes. Within my first month at the CDC, I had identified several data patterns that the team hadn't previously recognized. Rural hospitals were experiencing resistance rates significantly higher than national averages, but not for the reasons everyone had assumed. Rather than being caused by overuse of antibiotics, the elevated resistance was primarily linked to delayed diagnosis and treatment due to geographic isolation and limited specialist availability. My findings caught the attention of Dr. Patricia Chen, the division director, who invited me to present my preliminary analysis to the CDC's leadership team in August. The presentation went exceptionally well, with several senior officials asking detailed questions about my methodology and requesting follow-up reports. Meanwhile, my personal life in Atlanta was surprisingly fulfilling. I had rented a small apartment in Virginia Highland, a walkable neighborhood with coffee shops, bookstores, and restaurants within easy reach. For the first time in years, I had weekends free to explore a new city, read books for pleasure, and develop interests outside of medical training. I made friends with other young professionals in my apartment complex and joined a hiking group that explored trails throughout northern Georgia. The social connections felt natural and effortless, unlike the strained family relationships I had left behind in Colorado. My family's communication during this period was sporadic and superficial. My mother would text occasionally asking about my health and the weather in Atlanta, but she never inquired about my work or research. Marcus had blocked me on social media after a disagreement about politics, and Isabella sent brief messages every few weeks that read like obligatory check-ins rather than genuine interest in my life. In September, Dr. Martinez informed me that our research had been selected for presentation at the Infectious Diseases Society of America's annual conference in San Francisco. I would be the lead presenter, sharing our findings with thousands of physicians, researchers, and public health officials from around the world. The conference presentation was scheduled for October 15th, and I spent weeks preparing detailed slides and practicing my delivery. The research had evolved significantly since my initial observations, now encompassing data from 127 rural hospitals and identifying specific intervention strategies that could reduce resistance rates by up to 40%. The night before my presentation, I called my parents to share the news about the conference. I thought they might be interested to know that their daughter would be presenting research to an international medical audience. "That sounds very impressive, Mija," my mother said when I explained the significance of the conference. "Your father and I are proud of you." Her words felt hollow, delivered with the same tone she might use to acknowledge a neighbor's promotion or a distant relative's achievement. There was no curiosity about the research itself, no questions about what I had discovered, no understanding of how unusual it was for a first-year researcher to be selected as a lead presenter at such a prestigious conference. The presentation, in San Francisco, exceeded my expectations. The auditorium was packed with nearly 800 attendees, and the response to our findings was overwhelmingly positive. During the question and answer session, prominent researchers from Johns Hopkins, Stanford, and the World Health Organization asked thoughtful questions and praised the innovative methodology we had developed. After the presentation, I was approached by Dr. James Williams, a senior advisor to the Surgeon General's office who had been in the audience. "Dr. Hernandez, your research addresses one of the most critical challenges facing rural healthcare," Dr. Williams said as we shook hands. "The Surgeon General's office has been looking for exactly this type of data to support new federal initiatives. Would you be willing to discuss expanding your research scope?" The conversation with Dr. Williams led to an invitation to Washington, D.C. the following month. The Surgeon General's office wanted to incorporate our findings into a comprehensive federal strategy for addressing healthcare disparities in underserved communities. I traveled to D.C. in November for a series of meetings with federal health officials. The experience was surreal. Sitting in conference rooms in federal buildings, discussing policy implications of research I had conducted, watching seasoned government officials take notes on my recommendations. During one of these meetings, Dr. Williams mentioned that our antimicrobial resistance research had been included in a briefing document for the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. "Your work is getting attention at the highest levels," he said casually. Didn't fully grasp the implications of that statement at the time. The idea that research I had conducted in my first year out of medical school could influence White House policy seemed impossibly ambitious. Back in Atlanta, I continued refining the research and expanding the dataset. By December, we had analyzed resistance patterns from over 200 rural hospitals and developed a predictive model that could identify facilities at highest risk for dangerous resistance outbreaks. The work was consuming but deeply satisfying. Unlike medical school, where I had been memorizing information discovered by others, I was now generating new knowledge that could directly impact patient care. The intellectual challenge combined with practical applications created a sense of purpose I had never experienced before. During the holidays, I returned to Colorado for a brief visit with my family. The dynamics hadn't changed significantly since my move to Atlanta. My parents were polite but distant, more interested in discussing Marcus's recent promotion to assistant manager at a local sporting goods store than my federal research collaborations. Marcus himself had developed a new girlfriend, Jennifer, who worked as a social media coordinator for a Denver-based clothing company. The family treated her arrival as a major milestone, with my mother already dropping hints about future grandchildren and wedding planning. At Christmas dinner, Isabella asked about my work at the CDC, but her questions were surface level and quickly redirected when Marcus wanted to discuss his plans for buying a house with Jennifer. "It must be nice having a government job with good benefits," my father commented at one point, reducing my research position to a generic federal employment opportunity. I realized during that visit that my family genuinely didn't understand what I was doing professionally, and more importantly, they didn't seem interested in learning. The gap between their perception of my work and its actual significance had grown too wide to bridge through casual conversation. I returned to Atlanta after New Year's with a renewed sense of independence and clarity. My family's inability to recognize or celebrate my achievements had paradoxically liberated me from seeking their approval. I was free to pursue opportunities based solely on merit and personal satisfaction. January brought an unexpected development in my research career. Dr. Martinez informed me that the CDC director had personally reviewed our antimicrobial resistance findings and wanted to nominate our project for the agency's highest research honor, the Charles C. Shepard Science Award. Addison, this nomination is extraordinary, Dr. Martinez explained during our meeting. You've been at the CDC for 6 months, and you're already being considered for an award that typically goes to researchers with decades of experience. The nomination process required detailed documentation of research methodology, policy impact, and potential applications for future public health initiatives. I spent several weeks preparing the application materials, working closely with Dr. Martinez and other senior team members to present our findings in the most compelling way possible. In February, we received notification that our project had been selected as one of 3 finalists for the Shepard Science Award. The winner would be announced at the CDC's annual award ceremony in March, with the presentation being made by the agency director in front of the entire CDC staff. As March approached, I found myself in an unusual position. At 26 years old, less than 1 year out of medical school, I was potentially about to receive the CDC's highest research honor. The achievement represented validation of capabilities I hadn't even known I possessed when I walked across the graduation stage alone 11 months earlier. The CDC awards ceremony was scheduled for March 22nd, and the anticipation within our research team was palpable. Dr. Martinez had mentioned that winning the Shepard Science Award would virtually guarantee additional funding for our rural healthcare initiatives and could lead to permanent research positions at the agency. In the weeks leading up to the ceremony, I received several congratulatory messages from colleagues I had met at conferences and researchers who had followed our published findings. The Antimicrobial Resistance Project had gained recognition within the scientific community much faster than anyone had anticipated. Dr. Patricia Chen scheduled a meeting with me 2 days before the awards ceremony to discuss future career possibilities at the CDC. Her office overlooked the agency's main courtyard, with walls lined with photographs of previous award recipients and milestone achievements in public health history. Addison, regardless of Thursday's outcome, I want you to know that your work this year has been exceptional, Dr. Chen began. We're prepared to offer you a permanent research scientist position with our Antimicrobial Resistance Division, along with the opportunity to lead your own research team. The offer was beyond anything I had imagined when I accepted the 1-year deferral from residency. A permanent position at the CDC would mean forgoing clinical practice entirely, dedicating my career to research that could influence healthcare policy at national and international levels. Dr. Chen, this is an incredible opportunity, but I should mention that I'm still committed to completing residency training. Clinical experience is important for the type of research I want to pursue. We've actually discussed that concern with the agency director, she replied with a smile. The CDC has partnerships with several teaching hospitals that allow our researchers to maintain clinical skills through part-time rotations. You could complete residency training over 4 years instead of 3, while continuing your research. Work here. It's an unusual arrangement, but your circumstances are unusual. The conversation lasted over an hour, covering research funding, publication opportunities, and long-term career trajectories that I had never considered possible. By the time I left Dr. Chen's office, I was contemplating a future that bore no resemblance to the traditional medical career path I had originally planned. The night before the award ceremony, I called my parents to let them know about the potential recognition. I wasn't expecting enthusiastic support, but I thought they should be aware of what was happening in my professional life. "Mia, that sounds wonderful," my mother said when I explained the significance of the Shepherd Science Award. "Your father, and I hope you win." Her response was pleasant but detached, as if I had told her about a raffle ticket I had purchased or a contest I had entered on a whim. There was no recognition that this award represented validation of work that could impact millions of patients across the country. "Mom, this is the CDC's highest research honor. If I win, it means my work is being recognized as some of the most important public health research conducted this year." "That's very nice, sweetheart. Make sure you take pictures if you win. We'd love to see them." The conversation ended with the same superficial politeness that had characterized our interactions since my graduation. I hung up feeling frustrated, but not surprised by their lukewarm response. The awards ceremony took place in the CDC's main auditorium, a modern theater-style venue that seated nearly 500 people. The audience included CDC leadership, research, staff, invited guests from partner organizations, and representatives from the Department of Health and Human Services. I sat with Dr. Martinez and our research team in the third row, wearing a navy blue dress that I had purchased specifically for the occasion. The ceremony began with presentations of several smaller awards, followed by recognition of employee service milestones and retirement celebrations. The Shepherd Science Award was the final and most prestigious recognition of the evening. Dr. Rebecca Morrison, the CDC director, took the stage to present the award and explain the significance of this year's winning research. The Charles C. Shepherd Science Award recognizes research that exemplifies scientific excellence and demonstrates clear potential for improving public health outcomes, Dr. Morrison began. This year's recipient has conducted groundbreaking work on antimicrobial resistance patterns in rural healthcare settings, research that has already influenced federal policy discussions and international public health initiatives. My heart was racing as she continued describing the winning project. Every detail she mentioned matched our research exactly, but I tried to remain composed until the official announcement. The 2026 Shepherd Science Award goes to Dr. Addison Hernandez and the Antimicrobial Resistance Research Team for their innovative analysis of healthcare disparities in underserved communities. The auditorium erupted in applause as I stood and made my way to the stage. Dr. Morrison handed me a crystal award engraved with the CDC seal and my name, then shook my hand as cameras flashed throughout the theater. "Dr. Hernandez, would you like to say a few words?" Dr. Morrison asked, gesturing toward the podium microphone. I approached the microphone, looking out at an audience of accomplished scientists and public health experts who were applauding my work. The moment felt surreal, standing on a stage receiving recognition that most researchers spend entire careers hoping to achieve. "Thank you for this incredible honor," I began. This research was only possible because of the collaboration and mentorship I received from Dr. Martinez and the entire antimicrobial resistance team. More importantly, this work represents the voices of patients in rural communities who deserve the same quality healthcare available in major metropolitan areas. The audience responded with enthusiastic applause, and several people stood as I concluded my brief remarks. As I walked back to my seat, Dr. Martinez embraced me with tears in her eyes. "Addison, you've just made history," she whispered. "You're the youngest researcher ever to receive this award." The reception following the ceremony was filled with congratulations from colleagues, introductions to senior officials I had only read about in public health journals, and discussions about future research collaborations. Several representatives from the World Health Organization expressed interest in expanding our methodology to study antimicrobial resistance in developing countries. During the reception, Dr. Williams from the Surgeon General's office approached me with news that would change everything. "Dr. Hernandez, congratulations on this well-deserved recognition. he said, shaking my hand warmly. Your research has caught the attention of some very important people in Washington. The White House Office of Science and Technology Policy has been following your work closely. He paused, glancing around to ensure our conversation remained private. In fact, they've requested a briefing on your findings. The President's Science Advisor wants to discuss incorporating your research into a major rural healthcare initiative. That will be announced next month. I felt my knees go weak. The President's Science Advisor wants to meet with me? More than that, Dr. Williams continued. They want you to be part of the announcement. This rural healthcare initiative is going to be one of the administration's signature policy achievements, and your research provides the scientific foundation for the entire program. The conversation continued for several more minutes, but I found it difficult to focus on the details. The idea that my work would influence presidential policy seemed impossible to comprehend. 2 days after the CDC awards ceremony, I received a formal invitation from the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. I was being invited to Washington, D.C. for a series of briefings culminating in a meeting with the President's Science Advisor and potentially other senior administration officials. The letter, printed on official White House letterhead, specified that I should prepare a comprehensive presentation of our antimicrobial resistance findings, with particular emphasis on policy recommendations for improving healthcare access in rural communities. I immediately called Dr. Chen to share the news about the White House invitation. Addison, this is extraordinary, she said, her voice filled with excitement. The CDC has researchers who have worked here for 20 years and never received this level of recognition from the administration. You're about to influence healthcare policy at the presidential level. Over the following week, I prepared for the Washington meetings with an intensity that reminded me of medical school exam preparation. I revised our research findings, developed policy recommendations, and practiced presentations that could translate complex scientific data into actionable government initiatives. The night before traveling to Washington, I considered calling my family to share news about the White House meetings. However, their lukewarm response to the CDC award had convinced me that they wouldn't understand the significance of this opportunity, either. Instead, I spent the evening reviewing my presentation materials and trying to process the rapid trajectory my career had taken. 15 months earlier, I had walked across a graduation stage alone, wondering if my family's absence meant that my achievements didn't matter to anyone. Now I was preparing to brief presidential advisors on research that could influence healthcare policy for millions of Americans. The validation I had once sought from my family seemed trivial compared to recognition from the nation's highest levels of government. As I packed for the trip to Washington, I realized that my family's neglect had actually been a gift. Their absence had forced me to define success on my own terms, pursue opportunities based on merit rather than external validation, and develop the independence necessary to thrive in environments where recognition was earned rather than given. Flight to Washington, D.C. felt different from any travel I had experienced before. As the plane descended toward Reagan National Airport, I could see the Capitol Dome and Washington Monument through the window, landmarks that had always seemed like distant symbols of power and influence. Now, I was arriving as someone whose work would potentially shape federal policy. Dr. Sarah Blackwood from the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy met me at the airport. She was a composed woman in her 40s who had previously worked at the National Institutes of Health before joining the administration's science team. Dr. Hernandez, welcome to Washington, she said as we shook hands at the baggage claim. I've been following your antimicrobial resistance research since the San Francisco conference presentation. Your findings are exactly what we need to support the President's Rural Healthcare Initiative. During the drive to my hotel, Dr. Blackwood outlined the schedule for my 3-day visit. I would present my research to the White House science team, meet with staff from the Department of Health and Human Services, and participate in a policy planning session for the rural healthcare announcement. There's one more meeting on your schedule that we'll discuss later, Dr. Blackwood mentioned as we pulled up to the Willard Intercontinental Hotel, just 2 blocks from the White House. It's still being confirmed, but it would be quite significant for your career. My hotel room had a view of the Treasury building, and I spent the evening reviewing my presentation materials while trying to process the surreal nature of my circumstances. 2 years earlier, I had been a medical student studying in a cramped library. Now I was staying in a historic Washington hotel, preparing to advise presidential staff on healthcare policy. The first day of meetings took place in the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, an ornate granite structure adjacent to the White House. Security was extensive, with multiple checkpoints, metal detectors, and background verification procedures that took nearly an hour to complete. The conference room where I presented my research was filled with senior policy advisors, scientists, and representatives from various federal agencies. My presentation covered the methodology behind our antimicrobial resistance findings, the specific challenges facing rural hospitals, and detailed recommendations for federal intervention strategies. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Dr. Michael Torres, the Deputy Director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, asked particularly insightful questions about implementation costs and timeline feasibility for the interventions I had proposed. Dr. Hernandez, your research provides the scientific foundation for policy changes we've been considering for months, Dr. Torres said after my presentation. The data you've collected demonstrates clear disparities that demand federal action. Following the presentation, I met individually with representatives from the Department of Health and Human Services, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and the Indian Health Service. Each meeting revealed how extensively my research had circulated within the federal health bureaucracy. Dr. Jennifer Walsh from HHS explained that my findings had already influenced preliminary discussions about rural hospital funding formulas and antibiotic stewardship programs. Your work has provided quantitative evidence for problems that we suspected existed, but couldn't previously document, Dr. Walsh said. This research will be cited in federal regulations and congressional testimony. The second day of meetings focused on policy development and implementation strategies. I worked with a team of legislative affairs specialists to translate my research findings into specific policy recommendations that could be incorporated into federal healthcare programs. The level of detail required for policy development was unlike anything I had encountered in medical or research settings. Every recommendation needed to include cost projections, timeline estimates, legal considerations, and potential opposition arguments. During lunch with Dr. Blackwood, she mentioned the additional meeting that had been tentatively scheduled for my final day in Washington. Dr. Hernandez, we've received approval for you to meet directly with the President's science advisor, Dr. Amanda Richardson, Dr. Blackwood said. She wants to discuss your research personally before the Rural Healthcare Initiative announcement. Dr. Richardson was a legendary figure in American science policy, a former Harvard professor who had advised 3 different presidential administrations on healthcare and technology issues. The opportunity to meet with her was beyond anything I had imagined when I accepted the CDC position. There's also a possibility, Dr. Blackwood continued, that you could be included in the actual policy announcement. The president is planning a major speech about rural healthcare disparities, and your research provides the scientific credibility for the entire initiative. That evening, I called Dr. Martinez in Atlanta to share updates about the Washington meetings. Her excitement was infectious, and she helped me understand the historical significance of what was happening. Addison, you're witnessing the intersection of science and policy at the highest levels of government, Dr. Martinez said. Most researchers spend their entire careers hoping to influence policy indirectly through published papers. You're directly advising the people who make decisions affecting millions of Americans. The meeting with Dr. Richardson took place in her West Wing office, a compact but elegantly appointed space with windows overlooking the White House South Lawn. She was reviewing my research files when I arrived, with pages of handwritten notes scattered across her desk. "Dr. Hernandez, please have a seat," Dr. Richardson said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. "I've been studying your antimicrobial resistance research for the past month. Your methodology is innovative, your conclusions are sound, and your policy recommendations are practical." She leaned back in her chair, studying me with intense curiosity. "What I find most remarkable is that you're essentially a first-year researcher who has produced work that seasoned scientists couldn't achieve. How do you explain that?" The question caught me off guard. I had been prepared to discuss research, methodology, and policy implications, not to analyze my own capabilities. "Dr. Richardson, I think my recent clinical training gave me a perspective that researchers who have been removed from patient care for years might lack. I could recognize patterns in the data because I had seen similar situations in hospital settings." "That's exactly right," she replied with a smile. "You've maintained the practical perspective that pure researchers sometimes lose. Your work bridges the gap between academic theory and clinical reality." The conversation continued for over an hour, covering everything from my medical school experience to my long-term career goals. Dr. Richardson was particularly interested in my thoughts about the future of rural healthcare policy and the role of research in government decision-making. Near the end of our meeting, Dr. Richardson made an announcement that left me speechless. "Dr. Hernandez, the President has decided to include you in next week's rural healthcare announcement. You'll be introduced as the lead researcher whose work inspired the new federal initiative. The ceremony will take place in the Rose Garden, with coverage by national media." I felt my heart racing. "Dr. Richardson, I'm honored, but are you sure? I'm just a first-year researcher." "You're the researcher whose work is driving a major presidential policy initiative," she corrected. "Your age and experience level make the story even more compelling. You represent the next generation of scientists who will shape American healthcare policy." She handed me a folder containing preliminary details about the Rose Garden ceremony. "The President will personally recognize your contributions during his speech. You'll be seated with other key figures who influence the policy development process." As I left the West Wing that afternoon, I walked slowly across Lafayette Square, trying to process what had just occurred. In 1 week, I would be standing in the Rose Garden while the President of the United States credited my research as the foundation for a major healthcare initiative. The irony was overwhelming. My family had skipped my medical school graduation because they didn't consider it important enough to prioritize over a backyard barbecue. Now, the President was planning to recognize my achievements in front of the national media. I spent my final evening in Washington walking around the National Mall, reflecting on the trajectory that had brought me to this moment. The Lincoln Memorial was illuminated against the night sky, and I sat on the steps thinking about the gap between my family's perception of my life and the reality of what I had accomplished. My phone buzzed with a text message from Isabella. "Hey, Addie. Hope you're doing well in Atlanta. Marcus got engaged to Jennifer last weekend. Mom is already planning the wedding for next fall. When are you coming home to visit?" The message felt like communication from another universe. While I was preparing to meet with the President, my family was focused on wedding planning and wondering when I might visit home. I decided not to respond to Isabella's text immediately. The disconnect between their priorities and my reality had become so vast that casual conversation felt impossible. Instead, I spent the rest of the evening preparing for what would be the most significant moment of my professional life. In 7 days, I would stand in the Rose Garden as the President of the United States recognized my contributions to American healthcare policy. The validation I had once sought from my family seemed insignificant compared to recognition from the highest office in the country. Their absence from my graduation had forced me to seek achievement on my own terms, and those terms had exceeded anything I could have imagined. The week between my return to Atlanta and the Rose Garden ceremony passed in a blur of preparation and disbelief. Dr. Martinez had arranged for the entire CDC antimicrobial resistance team to watch the presidential announcement together in the main conference room, complete with champagne and congratulatory banners. Addison, do you realize that you're about to become the public face of rural healthcare? Reform, Dr. Martinez asked during one of our preparation sessions. After the president's speech, you'll be fielding interview requests from major news networks, medical journals, and policy organizations. The media attention aspect hadn't fully occurred to me until she mentioned it. I had been focused on the honor of presidential recognition, without considering that the ceremony would thrust me into the national public spotlight. Dr. Chen scheduled a meeting to discuss how the presidential recognition would affect my career trajectory at the CDC. The agency was already receiving inquiries from congressional staff members who wanted to schedule hearings about rural healthcare disparities. This level of visibility comes with opportunities and responsibilities, Dr. Chen explained. You'll be testifying before Congress, speaking at major medical conferences, and representing the CDC at international health summits. Are you prepared for that level of public engagement? The question made me reflect on how dramatically my life had changed since medical school graduation. 2 years earlier, I had been an anxious student worried about passing board exams. Now I was preparing to advise federal lawmakers on healthcare policy. 3 days before the Rose Garden ceremony, I received an unexpected phone call from a producer at CNN who wanted to schedule an interview following the presidential announcement. Then came requests from the New York Times, the Washington Post, and several medical trade publications. Dr. Hernandez, your story is remarkable, explained Jessica Crawford, the CNN producer. A young researcher whose family skipped her medical school graduation is now being recognized by the president for groundbreaking healthcare research. Our viewers will be fascinated by your journey. I was surprised that news organizations had somehow learned about my family's absence from graduation. The details seemed irrelevant compared to the policy significance of my research, but journalists appeared intrigued by the personal narrative. How did you know about my graduation? I asked Jessica. We do background research on people who are being featured in presidential ceremonies, she replied. The contrast between your family's lack of support and your subsequent achievements makes for a compelling human interest story. The realization that my personal life would be scrutinized by national media added an unexpected layer of anxiety to the upcoming ceremony. I had assumed the focus would be on healthcare policy rather than family dynamics. 2 days before traveling to Washington, I decided to call my parents and inform them about the presidential recognition. Despite our strained relationship, I felt they should hear about the Rose Garden ceremony directly from me rather than discovering it through news coverage. My mother answered the phone with her usual cheerful tone. Mija, how are you doing? We haven't heard from you in weeks. I'm doing well, Mom. I'm calling because I wanted to let you know about something important happening this week. The president is going to recognize my research work at a ceremony in the White House Rose Garden. There was a long pause. The president? Like, the actual president? Yes, Mom. My antimicrobial resistance research is being used to develop a major federal healthcare initiative. The president is announcing the policy next Thursday, and I'll be there as the lead researcher. Another pause, followed by muffled conversation as my mother apparently covered the phone to speak with my father. Roberto, come here. Addison says she's meeting with the president. I could hear my father's voice in the background asking for clarification, followed by more muffled discussion. Mija, are you sure about this? The President of the United States? Her tone suggested skepticism rather than excitement, as if I might be exaggerating or misunderstanding the situation. Yes, Mom, I'm sure. I've been working with White House staff for the past month. My research is going to be featured in a major presidential speech about rural health care. Well, that's very impressive, sweetheart. Make sure you dress nicely for the cameras. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, but her response remained superficial and somewhat bewildered. She seemed unable to process that her daughter would be recognized by the president, treating the news as if it were an unusual but not particularly significant development. After hanging up, I realized that my family's reaction to the presidential recognition was consistent with their response to every previous achievement. They lacked the context to understand the significance of what was happening, and more importantly, they seemed uninterested in acquiring that context. The flight to Washington for the Rose Garden ceremony was surreal. Dr. Martinez accompanied me, along with Dr. Chen and 2 other senior CDC officials who had been invited to attend. We discussed logistics, media strategy, and the potential impact of the presidential announcement on future research funding. Addison, after tomorrow's ceremony, you'll be one of the most recognizable young scientists in America, Dr. Chen observed, as our plane descended toward Reagan National Airport. Medical students will know your name. Healthcare policy experts will cite your work. You've achieved something that most researchers only dream about. The White House advance team had arranged for me to stay at the same hotel as my previous visit, but this time my schedule was packed with media briefings, speech rehearsals, and meetings with other policy experts who would be featured in the ceremony. The evening before the Rose Garden announcement, I attended a reception in the state dining room where I met the other researchers, healthcare executives, and rural community leaders who would be recognized alongside my work. The gathering included Nobel Prize winners, former surgeon generals, and researchers whose work I had studied during medical school. Dr. Robert Anderson, a rural healthcare expert from Montana who had advised 4 different presidential administrations, approached me during the reception. Dr. Hernandez, I've been following your antimicrobial resistance research since the EDSA conference, he said. Your work fills a gap that the policy community has been struggling with for years. You've provided quantitative evidence for disparities that we knew existed but couldn't adequately document. The conversation with Dr. Anderson and other established experts helped me understand the broader significance of my research within the healthcare policy ecosystem. My work hadn't just identified problems, it had provided solutions that policymakers could actually implement. The morning of the Rose Garden ceremony, I woke before dawn and spent nearly 2 hours getting ready. The White House Protocol Office had provided detailed instructions about attire, arrival procedures, and ceremony logistics. I chose a charcoal gray suit that projected professionalism without being overly formal, paired with a blue blouse that would photograph well against the Rose Garden's spring foliage. The outfit struck the right balance between scientific credibility and television-appropriate presentation. Dr. Blackwood met me at the White House visitors' entrance at 10 a.m. for final preparations. We reviewed my seating assignment, the sequence of events during the ceremony, and my role during the post-speech reception. Dr. Hernandez, you'll be seated in the front row, directly facing the podium, Dr. Blackwood explained as we walked through the West Wing corridors toward the Rose Garden. When the president mentions your research, he'll gesture toward you. The cameras will focus on your reaction, so try to look appropriately honored, but not surprised. The Rose Garden was more intimate than it appeared in television coverage, with neat rows of white chairs arranged on the lawn and camera equipment positioned at strategic angles. Approximately 200 guests were attending, including members of Congress, senior administration officials, healthcare industry leaders, and representatives from major news organizations. As guests began arriving and taking their seats, I recognized several faces from television news programs and medical conferences. The audience represented the intersection of American healthcare policy, scientific research, and political power. Dr. Martinez squeezed my hand as we took our seats in the front row. Addison, savor this moment. You've earned recognition that most researchers spend entire careers hoping to achieve. At exactly 11:30 a.m., the president emerged from the Oval Office and walked across the lawn toward the podium. The assembled guests rose to their feet in respectful applause as he approached the microphone. Standing just 20 feet away from the President of the United States, I felt the weight of the moment settling over me. In a few minutes, the leader of the free world would personally acknowledge research I had conducted in my first year out of medical school. The President began his remarks by outlining the scope of healthcare disparities in rural America, citing statistics about hospital closures, physician shortages, and delayed access to specialized care. His speech was comprehensive and detailed, demonstrating genuine understanding of the issues affecting underserved communities. Today, we're announcing a comprehensive federal initiative to address these disparities, the President continued, his voice carrying across the Rose Garden with practiced authority. This initiative is based on groundbreaking research conducted by some of America's finest young scientists, researchers who have identified both the problems and the solutions. My heart began racing as I realized this was the moment when my work would be specifically mentioned. The President paused and looked directly at me in the front row. The foundation of our Rural Healthcare Initiative comes from the innovative research of Dr. Addison Hernandez, a brilliant young scientist at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The cameras immediately focused on me as applause erupted throughout the Rose Garden. I tried to maintain composure while feeling overwhelmed by the surreal nature of hearing my name spoken by the President of the United States. Dr. Hernandez's groundbreaking work on antimicrobial resistance in rural hospitals has revealed disparities that demand immediate federal action, the President continued. Her research demonstrates that patients in underserved communities face resistance rates 40% higher than national averages, not due to overuse of antibiotics, but because of delayed diagnosis and limited access to specialized care. He gestured toward me again, and I managed a modest smile as more applause filled the garden. Dr. Hernandez, would you please stand so we can properly recognize your contributions to American healthcare? I rose from my chair, feeling the weight of 200 pairs of eyes focused on me. The moment felt frozen in time as cameras clicked and television crews recorded my reaction to presidential recognition. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Addison Hernandez represents the best of American scientific innovation, the President declared, as I remained standing. At just 26 years old, she has produced research that will influence healthcare policy for decades to come. The applause continued for nearly a full minute. As I finally sat back down, Dr. Martinez leaned over and whispered, "Addison, you've just been personally endorsed by the President on national television. Your life is about to change completely." The President continued his speech for another 15 minutes, outlining specific policy initiatives that would be implemented based on my research findings. The federal government would invest $2.8 billion over 5 years in rural hospital infrastructure, antibiotic stewardship programs, and telemedicine initiatives designed to reduce the resistance patterns I had identified. After concluding his remarks, the President walked directly to where I was seated and extended his hand. "Dr. Hernandez, thank you for your service to our country," he said as we shook hands. "Your research is going to save lives." "Thank you, Mr. President. It's an honor to contribute to such an important initiative." He leaned closer and added quietly, "I understand your family wasn't always supportive of your academic pursuits. I hope today's recognition helps them understand the significance of your achievements." I was stunned that he knew about my family situation, but managed to respond gracefully. "Mr. President, their support or lack thereof doesn't diminish the importance of the work. This recognition means everything to me." The post-ceremony reception in the state dining room was a whirlwind of congratulations, business card exchanges, and impromptu interviews with journalists who had covered the announcement. I found myself surrounded by people whose names I recognized, from medical journals, policy publications, and television news programs. Senator Patricia Morrison from Colorado approached me during the reception with news that would add another layer of complexity to the day's events. "Dr. Hernandez, congratulations on this well-deserved recognition," Senator Morrison said. "I represent Colorado, so I'm particularly proud to see one of our medical school graduates making such significant contributions to national policy." She paused, lowering her voice slightly. "I should mention that my staff has been contacted by several news organizations asking about your background. Apparently, there's quite a story about your family missing your medical school graduation while you were achieving these remarkable accomplishments." The senator's comment confirmed my suspicion that the personal aspects of my story would attract as much media attention as the policy implications of my research. The CNN interview was scheduled for 4 p.m. that same day, immediately following the Rose Garden ceremony. Jessica Crawford, the producer I had spoken with earlier, met me in the hotel lobby with a camera crew and lighting equipment. "Dr. Hernandez, the contrast between your family skipping your graduation and today's presidential recognition is remarkable," Jessica began once the cameras were rolling. "How do you reconcile those two experiences?" The question forced me to articulate feelings I had been processing privately for nearly 2 years. My family's absence from graduation was disappointing, but it also liberated me from seeking external validation, I replied. I learned to define success based on the impact of my work rather than the approval of people who didn't understand what I was trying to accomplish. "Have you spoken with your family since the presidential ceremony?" "Not yet, but I'm sure they're aware of today's events through news coverage." The interview continued for another 20 minutes, covering my research methodology, policy implications, and future career plans. Jessica was particularly interested in the message my story might send to other young scientists whose families don't support their academic ambitions. "What would you tell a young person whose family doesn't understand or support their scientific aspirations?" she asked. "I would tell them that validation from people who don't understand your work is less meaningful than recognition from those who do," I answered. "Pursue excellence for its own sake, and the right kind of recognition will follow." After the CNN interview, I returned to my hotel room and finally allowed myself to process the magnitude of what had occurred. I sat on the bed, still wearing my gray suit from the ceremony, and scrolled through news articles that were already being published about the presidential announcement. The headlines were remarkable. "Young CDC researchers' work inspires major healthcare initiative. President recognizes 26-year-old scientist for groundbreaking rural health research." And "From medical school to the White House, Dr. Addison Hernandez's rapid rise." My phone had been buzzing constantly with congratulatory messages from colleagues, former professors, and medical school classmates who had seen the ceremony coverage. The volume of attention was overwhelming but deeply satisfying. Around 6 p.m., I finally received a call from my family. Isabella was on the line with my parents, and Marcus apparently gathered around the phone. "Addie, we just saw you on the news," Isabella exclaimed. "Mom recorded the whole thing when she saw your name on the screen. We can't believe our little sister met the president." I could hear excited chatter in the background as my family members talked over each other, trying to process what they had witnessed on television. My mother's voice came through clearly. "Mija, we had no idea your work was so important. The president said you're going to save lives." The irony wasn't lost on me. For 2 years, I had tried to explain the significance of my research to family members who showed little interest. Now, because the president had validated my work on national television, they suddenly understood its importance. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart," my father added, his voice filled with emotion I hadn't heard in years. "We always knew you were smart, but we didn't realize you were making such a difference in the world." Marcus, who had previously dismissed my academic achievements as selfish ambition, was now eager to claim association with my success. "Addie, this is incredible," he said. "I've been telling everyone at work that my sister met the president. Can you get us pictures from the White House?" The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with my family asking detailed questions about the ceremony, the president's remarks, and my future plans. Their sudden interest and pride felt hollow after years of indifference, but I tried to respond graciously. After hanging up, I reflected on the complete reversal in my family's attitude. The same research they had dismissed as just studying was now a source of family pride because it had received presidential recognition. Their newfound enthusiasm confirmed what I had suspected for months. Their support was contingent on external validation rather than genuine understanding or appreciation of my work. They were proud of me now because the president had told them they should be proud, not because they recognized the intrinsic value of what I had accomplished. Over the following weeks, the media attention continued to escalate. I appeared on morning talk shows, gave interviews to major medical journals, and testified before congressional committees about rural healthcare disparities. The presidential recognition had transformed me from a promising young researcher into a nationally recognized expert on healthcare policy. My family's attitude toward my achievements remained enthusiastic, but I recognized it as a superficial response to external validation rather than genuine understanding. They proudly shared news articles about my television appearances and congressional testimony, but they still couldn't explain what my research actually involved or why it mattered. The experience taught me a valuable lesson about the difference between conditional and unconditional support. My family's pride was contingent on recognition from authorities they respected, while the colleagues and mentors who had supported my work throughout medical school and my CDC tenure had recognized its value regardless of external validation. 6 months after the Rose Garden ceremony, I was offered a permanent position as senior research scientist at the CDC, along with the opportunity to establish my own research laboratory focused on healthcare disparities. I also received offers from several prestigious universities and private research institutions. As I considered these career options, I realized that my family's absence from my medical school graduation had been the catalyst for everything that followed. Their neglect had forced me to develop independence, resilience, and internal motivation that proved essential for thriving in competitive research environments. The validation I had once sought from them seemed trivial compared to the recognition I had earned from scientific peers, policy experts, and ultimately, the President of the United States. Their absence had been a gift that took 2 years to fully appreciate. Today, my research continues to influence federal healthcare policy, and I regularly advise government officials on issues affecting rural communities. My family attends every public event where I'm featured, proudly taking photographs and sharing news coverage with their friends. But I know the difference between their conditional pride and the unconditional support that truly matters in pursuing meaningful work. The people who believed in my potential before it received presidential validation are the ones whose opinions actually shaped my success. Sometimes the greatest gift your family can give you is teaching you that their approval isn't necessary for your achievements to matter. The months following the Rose Garden ceremony brought opportunities I never could have imagined. Harvard Medical School invited me to deliver their annual research symposium keynote address. The World Health Organization requested my participation in an international task force on antimicrobial resistance. Medical schools across the country began using my research as case studies in their public health curricula. Each invitation represented validation from institutions and experts who understood the technical complexity and policy implications of my work. Unlike my family's newfound enthusiasm, this recognition was based on scientific merit rather than media coverage. The speaking engagements took me to conferences in Geneva, London, and Tokyo, where I presented my findings to international audiences of healthcare professionals and policymakers. During a WHO conference in Switzerland, Dr. Elena Vasquez, the organization's director of antimicrobial resistance programs, approached me with an unexpected proposition. Dr. Hernandez, we're establishing a new global initiative to address antimicrobial resistance in developing countries, Dr. Vasquez explained during a coffee break between sessions. Your methodology for analyzing rural healthcare disparities could be adapted to study similar problems in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. Would you consider leading this international expansion? The opportunity would involve spending 6 months each year traveling to partner countries, establishing research protocols, and training local healthcare workers to implement antimicrobial stewardship programs. It was exactly the type of work I had dreamed about during medical school, when I imagined using my education to address global health challenges. Dr. Vasquez, this sounds like an incredible opportunity, but I should mention that I'm still relatively early in my career. Are you certain I have the experience necessary to lead such a complex international initiative? Your age is actually an advantage, she replied with a smile. Younger researchers often bring fresh perspectives that more experienced scientists might overlook. Additionally, your success in influencing American policy demonstrates that you can navigate complex institutional environments. The WHO position would require relocating to Geneva for half of each year, with the remaining time split between fieldwork and maintaining my CDC research in Atlanta. It represented the kind of career trajectory that most global health experts spend decades building toward. Meanwhile, my relationship with my family had settled into a new pattern that felt both more honest and more distant than our previous interactions. They eagerly shared news about my television appearances and conference presentations, but our conversations remained surface-level discussions of logistics and scheduling, rather than meaningful exchanges about my work or personal. During a brief visit to Colorado for Christmas, I observed how my family had incorporated my achievements into their social identity without developing any deeper understanding of what I actually did professionally. At a holiday party hosted by my parents, I listened as my mother introduced me to neighbors and family friends. "This is our daughter Addison, the one who met the president. She's some kind of doctor who works for the government in Atlanta." The introduction was technically accurate, but revealed how little she understood about my research or its significance. I had become a source of social capital for my family rather than a person whose work they genuinely valued or comprehended. Marcus had developed a habit of mentioning my presidential recognition during casual conversations, using my achievements to enhance his own social standing. "My sister's the CDC researcher who was on CNN," he would say when meeting new people, as if our family connections somehow elevated his own status. The dynamic felt exploitative, but also strangely liberating. My family's shallow understanding of my work meant they couldn't offer meaningful advice or criticism about my career decisions. I was free to make choices based entirely on professional considerations rather than family expectations. When I announced my acceptance of the WHO position during that Christmas visit, their response was predictably focused on logistics rather than the opportunity's significance for global health policy. "Geneva is so far away," my mother said, her primary concern being the increased travel distance rather than the professional advancement the position represented. "How often will you be able to visit home?" My father's main question involved whether working for an international organization would affect my American citizenship status, a concern that demonstrated his fundamental misunderstanding of how international research collaborations function. Isabella showed the most genuine interest in the details of my new role, asking thoughtful questions about the countries where I would be working and the specific health challenges I hoped to address. However, even her curiosity felt more like polite conversation than deep engagement with the substance of my career. The contrast between my family's reaction and the responses of my professional colleagues was striking. Dr. Martinez had tears in her eyes when I told her about the WHO appointment, understanding immediately that it represented recognition as a world-class expert in my field. "Addison, you're going to be shaping global health policy before your 30th birthday," she said, embracing me after I shared the news. "This is the type of opportunity that defines entire careers." Dr. Chen's response was equally enthusiastic and more pragmatic. She immediately began discussing how my international experience would enhance my value to the CDC and exploring possibilities for maintaining collaborative research relationships while I was based in Geneva. The CDC benefits enormously from having researchers who understand global health systems, Dr. Chen explained. Your WHO experience will make you an even more valuable asset when you return to Atlanta. These conversations with professional mentors and colleagues reminded me why their opinions mattered more than family approval. They understood the significance of my achievements because they operated in the same professional ecosystem, recognizing both the challenges I had overcome and the impact my work would have on public health policy. As I prepared for the transition to Geneva, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since that solitary graduation ceremony 3 years earlier. The disappointment of walking across the stage without family support had evolved into gratitude for the independence their absence had forced me to develop. My success hadn't occurred despite my family's lack of support, but partly because of it. Their indifference had eliminated the temptation to make career decisions based on their expectations rather than my own professional judgment. I had been free to pursue opportunities that challenged me intellectually and aligned with my personal values, without worrying about whether my choices would impress people who didn't understand them anyway. The WHO position would take me further from my family geographically, but the emotional distance had been established years earlier when they chose Marcus's backyard barbecue over my medical school graduation. That distance had become an asset rather than a liability, providing the psychological space necessary to build a career based on merit rather than family dynamics. 3 years later, sitting in my Geneva office overlooking Lake Geneva while reviewing antimicrobial resistance data from hospitals in Kenya and Cambodia, I occasionally thought about that graduation ceremony where I sat alone among families celebrating their children's achievements. The solitude had been painful at the time, but it had also been the beginning of a journey that led to recognition from the President of the United States, collaboration with the World Health Organization, and the opportunity to influence healthcare policy affecting millions of people worldwide. My family's absence from that graduation ceremony had been their choice, but it had ultimately become my advantage. Sometimes the greatest gift people can give you is teaching you that their presence isn't necessary for your success to matter. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.